So I guess we can get started. So we'll start with good evening, everyone. My name is Michele Hartwig, and I am the host of the Dirt Trail Running podcast and YouTube show. And I'm also the race director at Ornery Mill Racing, which puts on Kettle Moraine 100, Hennepin 100, Frozen Gnome 50K, Galena Sky, and a bunch of other Midwest trail races. And I'm here with my co-host, Krystal the Pistol Hardy. So, hi,
Hi,
Krystal.
everybody. Hope everyone's having a good day, good week, good month, good everything. Happy to be here. Happy to interview a very special guy today.
Yeah, so we are so excited to have our special guest of Zach Bitter. And as a Midwest trail running organization, it's really fun for us to see some Midwest trail runners go on to succeed so well. Zach has run a bunch of classic Midwest races like Ice Age 50 and Kettle Moraine 100K. Welcome to the show, Zach.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It's you reminded me that I'm far overdue for doing a race in the Midwest at this point. I think when I moved from Wisconsin out west, I thought to myself that I think I'd done Ice Age 4 years in a row, and I was like, I'm gonna be one of those guys who does Ice Age like 20 years in a row or something like that, and I haven't made it back since I left. So that one fell through, but I will make it back. I do need to do the Kettle 100 mile to go along with the 100K, and Hennepin's been one I've kind of had my eye on for a couple of years now. I just haven't had a schedule to put it on yet, though. So I'll be back eventually.
Yeah, we would love to have you at both of those. Hennepin, actually, so it's on a canal.
Mm-hmm.
And so the start of the race is the feeder canal. So it's downhill because the water has to go to the canal. So it's slightly downhill. And then it's downhill out, slight little uphill back, but like there's only like 700 feet of change in elevation the entire 100 miles, and then it's downhill to the finish line. So the first 50 miles is literally downhill with a tiny little hump in there. So it's as flat and fast as you can imagine. It'd be a great race for you.
Yeah,
And,
I actually was coaching someone. It was either a year or 2 years ago that was doing Hennepin, and just looking at the course profile, this individual was probably about a 24-hour target or so, and one of my messages, be careful on that slight downhill in the beginning, because 24 hours you're going to want to integrate some walking breaks, even though it's a flat course. And if you get a little, you could run the first 20 miles, no problem. But the question is, do you actually want to do that? And it's just pretty inviting for that kind of a purpose. So it's such an interesting course. I want to hope to get on soon.
Yeah, I think, that's really fun, really interesting to manage. And something that I've seen you do in your coaching is learning from experiences before and then taking that to your athletes. That's really cool. And also, I was looking up on Kettle. The last time you were there, you won the 100K, and you have the second fastest 100K time. So we would really love to have you come back. And then also your wife, I thought, might be interested in the 100, because Donna Perkins has the 100-mile course record she set in 1998. So it's a very long women's standing record. She won outright that year. And I thought your wife might be, or any ladies out there might be after that. As a lady race director, I have a special place in my heart for women athletes, and would love to see someone go after that record.
Yeah, Nicole, she actually grew up in kind of just north of Chicago. So she spent quite a bit of time on the Kettle trails back when she was out the way. So she knows them, and she hasn't done a race out there to my knowledge. So I've been telling her, like, one of these years we'll get back there, and you got to do Ice Age, Kettle, and some of those classic ones out that way, and return to the Midwest roots.
Yeah, that would be great. We'd welcome you, give you some good Midwest hospitality. Yeah, we wanted to talk a little bit about your Midwest roots, actually. So you went to school at the University of where was it?
Stevens Point.
Stevens Point, yeah. What brought you there?
Yeah, I grew up, actually my family moved to Baraboo, Wisconsin when I was in third grade. So I spent most of my life in Wisconsin. and we moved to Manitowoc as I was beginning high school. So when I kind of decided what I wanted to do post high school and college and stuff like that, I just was looking around at what schools. I knew I was going to probably go to a UW system school, so I was just kind of figuring out which one made the most sense. And Stevens Point checked a lot of boxes for me. They also had a pretty strong cross country track and field program, which was inviting for me, as well as I wanted to participate in that if possible. So, it was just far enough from home, so I didn't feel like I was just staying at home and going to college, but it was close enough where I could go home on the weekends if I wanted to or needed to. So it kind of fit a lot of those. But yeah, it was a great experience and happy to be a UW alum.
Did you become interested in like ultra running while you were there, or was that something that came afterwards?
Yeah, it definitely gained a lot of momentum afterwards. I think the first time I heard about an ultra marathon, or even heard about anyone running past a marathon for that matter, was my high school coach had just mentioned that there's this guy who had run 262 consecutive miles without sleeping and was going to try to run 300. And, I was just like, man, people run that far? That's crazy. So I was like thinking like, well, maybe I could be good at that or something like that. But it was like kind of a fleeting thought, more or less. And then by my sophomore, junior year in college, I read Dean Karnas's book, Ultra Marathon Man. And that was kind of my first real dive into the sport, in terms of just that it was out there and it was more than just like a couple of random crazy people deciding to run much further than they needed to. And I think it was when I read that book, I told myself, when I finish college, I'll do, a lot more 10Ks, half marathons, that sort of stuff. And then when I'm 30, I'll try an ultra marathon. But as fate would have it, I did my first one at age 24, and then I didn't really look back after that. So got in a
Which
little
one was
early.
your first one?
I did the North Face Midwest Regional. That's actually also in the Kettle area, but I don't think those don't exist anymore, I guess, after this year. But that one was the first one that I even saw in Wisconsin. In fact, I actually signed up for it mainly just because I was looking for a marathon to do in the fall of 2010. And as I was just kind of combing through the internet looking for races that were in the state or close by, I came across this 50 miler, and I remember thinking, I didn't even realize there was 50 miles in this 50 milers in the state. And little did I know there was like the Ice Age 50 mile and Kettle and all these other ones as well. But that was kind of like intriguing to me that it was that close. So I thought, well, I was actually going to be going back to grad school at the time, the following year. So that one actually had a prize purse on it too. So I thought like, well, maybe I could win a little money and knock down a little bit of that grad student debt that I'm about to acquire. So I signed up for that one, did it. I actually won it, got $1,000 and quickly invested that $1,000 into my car that broke down in the following weekend. So it was maybe a little bit of like do it for the right reasons, kind of a eye opener a week after. But that was the one that kind of got me introduced to the sport. For me in high school and college, I was a good runner, but I was never really at the top of the podium, so to speak. So winning a race, when I would normally be, at best kind of on the podium at some local smaller events like marathons and things like that, I could win some local 5K, 10K type stuff if it was small enough. But, in college, I was very much kind of like mediocre amongst a very good Division III school. And, I think just knowing that I really liked the longer running in general, and then being able to win the first race I did was a pretty inviting kind of culmination of a bunch of different aspects that kind of just made me kind of drawn to the sport of ultra marathoning eventually.
You talking about that makes me really curious. How did you train yourself? Like, how did you set up your coaching for yourself to do your first 50-mile race?
Yeah, if I could go back, I would do it differently, but I had a decent program, I would say. It was actually probably one of the better buildups I've had that in a more traditional sense. Like had I run a marathon that fall, I feel like I probably would have had a pretty good race. But I did kind of the basic kind of hard, easy, hard structure where like one day a week I would do some short, fast intervals. I would do like a tempo or what we call like a lactic threshold heart rate type run. and then I would do a long run. Those are kind of my 3 cornerstone workouts for the week. And then outside of those, I would run whatever I needed to just kind of recover from those and feel like I was getting enough volume to be ready for the 50 miler. I think the furthest I did was maybe 30 miles in the long run side of things. So I definitely had some uncertain or unfamiliar territory to cover that day. But it was kind of like this blend of like, I'm going to hit my like VO2 max system with short intervals. I'm going to hit my lactic threshold system with these tempo runs. Then I'm going to tax my aerobic system with the long runs and things like that, where now I would probably divide those a little more into their own kind of category and develop one at a time, and also position them so that the ones that are least specific to race pace would be earlier. So I'd probably do the short intervals earlier in the plan, and then move into some more like lactic threshold type tempo type runs near the middle. And then ultimately in the back end of the plan, I'd be just like doubling down quite literally on Saturdays and Sundays and doing kind of back-to-back long runs and things like that, and just really fine-tuning race day intensity pace. So the 50 miler gets a little interesting because I think for ultra marathons anyway, it's just short enough where you can kind of, for me, kind of flirt past aerobic threshold for a good chunk of it. Whereas with 100 miles, I'm going to basically be at or under aerobic threshold the whole way. So I'd probably blend a little bit of lactic threshold stuff deeper into the plan than I would for say 100 miler. But I kind of follow like a specificity is key, and I look at what the intensity is going to be and what the environment's going to be like on race day and kind of plan from there for the most part nowadays.
Yeah, I'm thinking when you did that, there probably wasn't a lot of people for you to follow, because you learn from the people that did it before. There was Dean Karnazes at the time, was doing stuff. Was there any place that you like specifically did your research for coaching at, or were you trained for that?
Yeah, it was interesting because I think one of my biggest takeaways from my college experience was just for the first time in my life actually diving in and understanding like why you would do a specific workout. So in high school, I got kind of interested in it a little bit by my senior year because I had a coach who was really, really into the sport himself. So like he would get excited about it. He would talk about kind of like workouts and things like that. But I kind of just listened and did what he told me for the most part. By the time I got to college, I kind of wanted to understand it, but I didn't understand ultra marathon strategy really. And I don't know that a whole lot of people did back then. And I think just the sport in terms of what we kind of know to work versus what we maybe thought would work 10 years ago to today, I think has grown quite a bit. So I don't know, like there was probably people who had had a better approach than what I implemented early on in those days, but I wasn't aware of it and I didn't have the foresight to really search it out at that time. So I was basically following kind of a pretty close to a marathon training plan for the most part, but like not necessarily, with maybe a little more emphasis on the long run and a little less emphasis on kind of marathon pacing type stuff. But yeah, I mean, since then I've followed tons of people and looked at their approaches and just tried to kind of like blend some things that I thought looked like it made sense into my own training, but ultimately kind of compile enough data and information to kind of know how my body responds to certain things and kind of like build a plan structured around my strengths and what I need to kind of do on race day. So very, very event specific. So it can change depending on the event terrain and the event weather and the event intensity, if it's 50K or 100 mile or something else like that. But I remember when I first got into it, I think like pretty much everyone was just kind of reading Anton Krupicka's blog and looking like, well, I guess you just got to run a ton. So it was kind of a funny time, I think. And you talk to other folks too, and it would just, it was kind of just like, people who wanted to run a lot. So they just did that. And that kind of seemed to be the recipe for success early on. And I think in the last 10 years, we've learned a lot about kind of how close you can flirt with that, where, you see people kind of come in and out of the sport and kind of burn themselves a little bit. And I think some of that's just, there's a lot of races to jump into. And if you get excited about the sport and start getting invited to events, before you know it, you could be doing something quite often. And if you're also hitting up a bunch of long runs and stuff on the weekends, over time, it can kind of tax you down a bit if you're not paying attention to the recovery component of it, as well as the specificity of training. So I would say one of the biggest things I've learned in the last 10 years, or that I've gotten better at, is kind of learning when to kind of take my foot off the gas in training and just really respect like recovery as this component to the training, where you can do all the work in the training. And that's the hard part, right? Actually executing the workouts, getting all that stuff done. The easy part should be okay, now I got my body reset. But that's the biggest mistake I see people make, I think, is they do the hard work, but they don't recover from it. So they don't maximize those gains that they just work so hard for. And I mean, I probably fell in that category to a degree in the early stages of my own training, but thankfully I was able to kind of recognize that and adjust before I ended up, out of the sport in 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, I think that that's something that comes, I don't know, for me, it's came with insecurity. Like, I just, you want to make sure you did enough. You've worked so hard. You don't want to like skip something. So you tend to kind of overdo it. And I think having a coach tell you it's okay, you need your body to recover, and it can really help you be the best version of yourself. Do you work with a coach or do you self-coach yourself?
Yeah, I self-coach for myself, partly just because that's part of the reasons why I love this sport, is just the kind of the planning and the structuring. And I haven't quite given up the the reins to that yet, although maybe I will at some point, just to get a different taste or get a separate set of eyes. I think there's value in a coach outside of just like, even if you feel like you know the way to program or you can predict what they're going to give you, is just talk you out of doing something that you'd maybe regret down the road. But for me, when I think about it, like, I really like building that stuff out for myself and other people. So I've kind of just stuck with that. And the curious part of me has kept me from hiring a coach. I'm also not really too afraid to like reach out to other people who I feel know something that I want to learn and try to glean from them and things like that too. So the researching of it is kind of a fun piece of the puzzle for me as well.
Like, so we have a coaching business here at Ordinary Meal Racing too, and every coach has their own personality and works with like certain athletes are attracted to that coach. I'm curious, like, I think you have so much value as a coach. What type of athlete do you feel like you work best with?
That's a good question, because I think it's like you can have a great coach and a great athlete, they don't always match up. And part of the coaching is, I guess the art side of coaching is just getting a client to be in a position where they're confident and they trust the training. So I could give someone a perfect training plan that matched their skills or matched them perfectly, but if they didn't believe it, it might not be the best plan for them. So that's kind of like the psychology behind it. So typically I think like the type of client that maybe responds to my coaching is someone who is willing to step away a little bit from maybe some of their preconceived notions with running. Because I think when I see kind of like two, I'm probably going to like leave some people out or some groups out here, but I think I see like more often than not kind of two groups of people that come to me for coaching. So it's like you get the person who just really fell in love with running and they just want to go and run a ton. So for that person, I have to kind of try to convince that like you don't necessarily just want to do a long run every time you go out, and then when you need to rest. There's some value in doing some short intervals, and with that comes a little less overall volume because it's such an intense like activity to do, and you need to respect that from the recovery standpoint. You end up getting injured and not be able to run at all. So kind of getting people to understand and respond to kind of the periodized training programs that I typically use. Uh, so people who are open to that, I think, tend to respond well. The other group I'll see sometimes too, I think, especially now as the sport's gotten more popular and more competitive, is you get folks who actually have that periodized training program background. Sometimes they've even competed in high school and college track and cross country or something like that, and they've probably done dozens of different like 5K to marathon type buildups. So they kind of have they have enough of an understanding to feel like they know what they should be doing. So then you have to convince them about like, okay, here's the right order of operations. So I think people who understand like that you want to compartmentalize these different systems and ultimately specify for the intensity and the environment that you're going to be in for race day are the ones that kind of respond the best to my coaching. That's not to say I don't necessarily deviate from my philosophy to degrees from time to time for certain individuals. Sometimes you'll be coaching someone and for whatever reason, I mean, one of the best examples I have is I've coached people in the past where it's like, we do short interval sessions. It's just like a recipe they're going to get injured. So we either look for ways to kind of help with that, whether that be like doing those uphills so they're not driving as much in impact, or maybe doing those on cross-train devices like ellipticals or bicycles or something like that. Or sometimes even just, since it's a least specific to race day intensity, is just bypassing that and just going maybe putting a few more eggs in kind of their lactic threshold and aerobic threshold basket can be kind of a valuable way to adjust for the individual. So, that's kind of, I guess that's kind of like where I look at with clients and kind of how I would adjust in those cases. But ultimately, you gotta buy in, or if you don't buy in, then you're gonna probably lose something on race day if you don't believe what you did was the best way forward.
What about nutrition? I know I believe you eat like a keto diet. Can runners reach out to you on nutrition advice?
Yeah, I follow what I would call kind of my high fat, low carb diet, which is maybe just a little larger umbrella than what people would take as like a ketogenic diet. So the way I describe it is like a ketogenic diet, if you're looking at it in the classical sense, is like a very, very carb restricted diet where you're typically targeting less than 50 grams of carbohydrate per day. So I'm not nearly that kind of like strict along those lines. Fat and protein are always going to make up the primary macronutrients of my nutrition, but I'm going to adjust carbohydrate intake based on kind of the activities that I'm doing. So I fall in that high fat, low carb category, but ketogenic maybe periodically throughout the year, like during off seasons or deload weeks, recovery is my primary focus type of times a year will be maybe when I flex down that low. My general take is that like with nutrition, with ultra marathon, since ultra marathon is a little less developed from the research standpoint, or actually probably a lot less developed from the research standpoint as your typical endurance training programs and racing and things like that, I think that we need to have options for people. So, whether that be a high fat, low carb, moderate carb, a high carbohydrate diet, I think when people have like these options to pick from and have this ability to choose, we can kind of narrow in on what's going to work best for them. So what I like to tell folks is what everyone's goal is on race day from a nutritional standpoint is to defend muscle glycogen. So the idea is that you get to the end of the race with intact enough muscle glycogen that your body isn't kind of fighting to slow you down because it's defending those finite resources that have been depleted over the course of the day. So whether you defend that by burning higher rates of fat at any or at the intensity you're going to race at, and therefore have to eat a little less on race day, or if you defend that by just getting as many carbs in as you can during the race itself, you're both kind of trying to do the same thing. So sometimes it just comes down to what's going to work for the individual. Does the individual have like an iron gut and can eat 400 calories an hour? Or is the person going to puke by mile 60 if they have more than one gel per hour or something like that? Then you have all these different variances there. So when people come with me, I usually try to start with where they're at. Some folks will come to me specifically because they know I've been doing a high fat, low carb diet for almost 10 years now, and have heard me on podcasts and things like that talk about it. So they just think that I understand it and can help them like navigate the pitfalls and things like that and structure it the way it is. So, it's actually kind of funny. A lot of times I do consult calls as well for folks who don't necessarily need a coach, but want to just ask a bunch of questions. And the folks with nutrition questions usually go that route a lot of times, but I probably get just as many people sign up that are following a pretty strict ketogenic diet, and they are like, something is just not quite working the way I want it. There's a lot of positives, so I've been sticking to it, but like there's these one or two things that haven't quite clicked yet. And I end up usually talking those folks into eating a little more carbohydrate than they had been historically, because they're at those kind of classic ketogenic lows. And, then they can kind of get that last bit of speed back that they were looking to kind of like go full circle with on the nutrition approach. And I think that one's always kind of funny to me, because I think like there's not a lot of high fat, low carb endurance athletes, probably a lot more in the ultra marathon sphere than like the traditional endurance sphere, but people more or less have identified me as like a high fat, low carb endurance athlete. So I think they just assume I'm talking everyone into a strict ketogenic diet versus kind of working with the individual where they're at and kind of finding the best option for them. But it's definitely one of the offerings that I have. And I feel like I'm one of the people that people reach out to with that type of questioning and things like that when they're experimenting with it or looking to kind of implement that into their training and racing.
Yeah, I think that's a really great approach. I know when I raced a lot, my body naturally craved meat. And then I know other people that really needed carbs. So it is good to, you know, find what's right for each individual person. And um, well, we would also wanted to talk to, oh, I had one other question. What is the most rewarding part for you being a coach?
That's a great question. You know, I really, I mean, this is maybe like predictable, but like one of the things I love about just the sport in itself is just like enjoying the process leading up to the race. And then obviously having a good race makes it even that much better. So like when I have a coaching client who like, you know, buys in early, says, hey, I think you're going to be the right coach for me. I'm going to, you know, listen to what you say and we're going to work together and we're going to find the best path forward. And then I'm going to have this race and hopefully improve. And, you know, the best scenario there is where you don't just have like a good build up to the race and then ultimately achieve the goal, but also have all these little victories along the way so that they're not just kind of this all eggs in one basket being the race. So like if it's something, it could be something as simple as like, okay, we're going to address this system of training for the next few weeks. And then we see them incrementally improve each week. You know, that's huge rewarding just in that little component of the training plan that they could take away, even if the race goes bad for whatever reason. So like a coaching client who they see that incremental progress or sometimes in some cases, big gains and things, depending on where they were coming from throughout those different systems of training. And then ultimately have a race where things click, where they're just like, I just felt like I was more prepared. I was more dialed in. I had less questions. I had more answers. Those are always rewarding when you can, the more of those like little victories plus the final victory you can get is great. But that's not always the most, I guess what I should, the way I want to describe is if I'm really, really excited about a particular client, it's almost, I always want them to have a good race, obviously. But if I have a client who goes through the training program and just makes great progress in the training program, big improvements on where they were previously, we can see it in their workouts, we can see it in all these other different metrics that we're looking at throughout the course of the training. And then for whatever reason, don't have their best day, but look back and think, man, I'm really glad I did that. I learned a ton. I made improvements. It didn't manifest on this particular race, but it will be down the road when I, you know, revisit my training and do this again. I have a special place in my heart, I guess, for that person too, because like, that's why I think people should be in the sport in the first place. I always tell folks, if I ever get to the point where the only reason I'm doing this is to race and I hate the process leading into the race, that'll be when I'm more or less done. Because like you kind of, when you think about how many hours and how much, you know, energy and time you spend getting ready for the event itself, it makes even these long 100-milers seem short when you look at all the hours you spent training and the sacrifices you make to be able to do that, especially for folks who are busy, their families and things like that. So, you know, people who really just, you know, decide for whatever reason that they really enjoyed the buildup, enjoyed the process, and that was the biggest win out of everything. That's the kind of client I think that is the most impactful for me in terms of like watching and getting motivation from.
Yeah, I think we've got a question from somebody in the audience. What supplements for recovery do you use?
For recovery, you know, the way I like to describe it is I think your day-to-day diet or your foods that you're eating should be kind of the big mover there. And then anything you do above and beyond that should be kind of just as like you know, add-ons that are like going to just like get you maybe a little bit more versus the big mover that is just a good nutritional plan to begin with. So for recovery, I'm always focusing on kind of high bioavailable protein sources. From a supplement standpoint, one I really like is the company I use from a nutrition standpoint is a company called S Fuels, and they make a recovery protein called Revive, and it has a blend of bioavailable protein sources as well as some exogenous ketones, which exogenous ketones are very, very much in their infancy in terms of what we know about them. And the research is kind of conflicting in terms of what they do from a performance standpoint. But the research gets a lot more convincing, even at the early stages from a recovery standpoint. So that's why I use theirs versus like a different like kind of protein supplement. So I'll use that after big workouts and big races. They'll make a strawberry ice, heavy whipping cream, and then a scoop of that, blend it up, make like a smoothie, which is great in the 110-degree Phoenix heat that we have right now.
Yeah, I lean for running. My first 100 was Javelina 100.
Oh, nice.
My dad lives out there, and I've done that race I think 3 times. I did the 100K twice and the 100 once. But really great trail running community that you have out there.
Yeah, no doubt. We're spoiled with their bike. But did you do Javelina in 2016 by any chance?
It could have been. I don't remember what year it was. I think it was earlier. It might have been 2016, actually. The first time I did it, I think, was earlier than that.
Sure.
I did it when it was the old course, and I actually could camp at the start line. Yeah. And I got out of the tent and just walked to the start line like 5 minutes before it started, and then just took off, and I could go to my tent and change clothes. It's gotten a lot bigger.
Yeah. It's pretty unique with how many people they have down at that start finish. And it's unique, I think, where they don't really let you crew outside of that start finish. So everyone that's not running is just packed in there. And then you get I think they had I think it was like almost 600 to 800 people between the 100 mile and the 100K the last few years. So, everyone's bringing like 1, 2, maybe 3 people with them. So it gets to be like quite the atmosphere down there at the headquarters, as they call it. But yeah, people are camping out there again now. I don't know about this year. This year is going to be different, I think, if it even occurs. But yeah, like I've been out there. I did it in 2016 and 2017, but I've been out there. I think I've been out there every year after that too. So the reason I asked about 2016 is that was the hottest year on record.
I know it was really hot one year when I did it. It felt like my head was cooking. And during the day, I was like, okay. And I was fit. I was very ready for the race. And I'm like, you know what? I feel like I'm cooking. I'm just going to walk. And then I'm going to run all night and pass everybody. And I did. I mean, I wasn't fast or anything, but I walked, and then I was able to run all night and felt really good at the finish line.
Yeah. So, patience can pay off on that one for sure.
Yeah. I was thinking of that because a lot of people gave me that same advice that you were talking about with Hennepin, of not going out too fast, because it was a really easy course to go out too fast on. Well, yeah, really cool. So, this year being the year of COVID, and I'm curious, when you went for this world record on the famous treadmill that's behind you there, was that in your plans before COVID-19?
No, actually, I was pretty far into a training plan for 100 mile over in London, which was going to be a 400-meter track loop course. So I think I was maybe 2 weeks into my race specific intensity buildup phase of training. So I just done 2 weeks where I hit just over 140 miles, and I did a couple big back-to-back long runs on a track. So I was getting ready to kind of put the final touches on that plan when kind of the cascade of race cancellations came through, and I think it was probably late March, if I remember right. Yeah. And the race I was going to do was on April 20th, I believe, somewhere in that back end of April. So that one fell down on the wayside, as every race kind of did during that month and the months following. But I was just, at first I was trying to think like, what should I do? So I tried to kind of think about like, well, what advice would I give my coaching clients? And the advice I'd been giving my coaching clients was this, is like, there's a few routes you can go. One is we can kind of scale back on peaking and just kind of build in some fundamentals and get you just like generally fit so that when we do get back to kind of racing, you'll be in a position where you have kind of the foundation there to really kind of build up for that specific thing. Or you can kind of do a time trial if you want. So like continue the plan and let's just pick a date and time to go and just see what you can do, whether it's the exact distance and environment of where you were originally going to race or not is it's not as big a deal. And then we started seeing virtual races and things pop up. So for me, I was thinking, well, I'm pretty fit for a very flat 100-miler. What's the next best thing if I don't want to just scale back on peaking? And I was familiar with treadmill records basically because I had seen like Michael Wardian do some 50K stuff, Jacob Puzzi do the 50-mile world best a few years back, and then Dave Proctor less than a year ago run, right around, I think it was 12:32 for 100 miles and 96.5 miles for 12 hours. So I was aware of these and I thought that'd be kind of a cool event to do that was probably in my range of skill sets, and thought, well, this is the time to do it because there's really nothing else possible. So I reached out to NordicTrack and some of my other sponsors and just said, I think I'm going to do this. I'm probably going to live stream it just so it's documented. And then they kind of had all their ideas, and it ended up becoming just as much of a production event, I think, as it was, me going after the record. We had almost 30 people come in and do guest and host speaking spots and things like that. So it snowballed very quickly, but it wasn't the original plan. It was kind of a backup plan that I put together with a lot of motivated people, I think, when it all was said and done.
I think of back when we started the interview and you were talking about reading Dean Karnazes' book, and then he was one of the people that was there for you for your treadmill. Am I correct on that? I believe I saw that.
Yeah. Dean came on. He actually helped host one of the blocks. So basically what we did is we took 12 hours. We broke it up into kind of 6 hosting slots. So we'd have a host or co-hosts for 2-hour blocks. And then every 30-minute increment, we'd bring in, a new guest. So Dean and Dave Scott, and for those who are wondering if they don't already know, Dave Scott is a 6-time Ironman world champion. So those two co-host, and they're friends. So they made a pretty good duo, and then we had some guests come in and talk with them. So yeah, Dean was there. I think if I remember right, he was talking about doing like a 48-hour treadmill or something like that. But he had also done, I had forgotten he had done this, but I do remember seeing it when it happened. Was he did like a 24-hour on a treadmill where they like put him on a raised platform in Times Square in New York. So it's like if the incentive to like not screw that one up isn't big enough, that's probably the way to do it, is put yourself in front of everyone in Times Square and see what you got.
Well, you were in sort of the same boat. How did that feel with that big production going on around you?
Yeah, it definitely had its pros and cons. I mean, it was definitely added another element of kind of like stress or just a little bit of like anxiety, knowing that there was this like kind of production built around it, and that like there was going to be absolutely no hiding in this case because I was the only competitor out there. So if I screw up, everyone screwed up more or less. But so leading in, it was maybe a little more stressful because I kind of had this like extra responsibility to help with that. But once the thing got going, I actually leaned on it quite a bit. I think I tuned in for about half of the interviews and stuff as a way to kind of pass the time. And I remember thinking, I think it was around hour 7 or so, like thinking to myself, man, if there weren't like another 10 to 15 guests waiting to come on that have already donated a chunk of their time on Saturday to come and help out with this thing, I don't know that I would make it to 12 hours. And so I think it kind of kept me on the treadmill for a bit there. At least it gave me one reason to stay on or keep pushing in some spots where I was maybe a little lower than others. But I think in the grand scheme of things, I was really happy we did it that way versus what I've been describing as the running equivalent of watching paint dry, which would have been if it was just me on camera the whole time running on a treadmill.
Did you feel like you had a groove going and it was just automatic, or like how did that feel? I can't imagine.
Yeah, that was probably the hardest part was because I've done enough of these like on a track or on a short loop now where I find that it's almost more stressful anytime I have to stop. A lot of times I'm chasing a fairly tight time margin. So, you lose a couple minutes and it adds up quick. So usually when I'm doing these on the track, especially, like, I'm really, really motivated to keep going and avoid stopping if at all possible. Whereas the treadmill there was like this big pull to get off the treadmill it just wasn't there, like kind of a reverse where I wanted nothing but to jump off of it. And, one of our other guests was Dr. Jeff Burns, who actually had just completed his PhD in like running mechanics and stuff like that. And he was explaining that, like, the big difference on a treadmill versus running, even on like a short loop track, is that you aren't making these micro adjustments to your pace that give you this sense of control. Like, you might be running really tight splits on a track, but you're making tiny micro adjustments that add up to like fractions of a second or full seconds at some points that kind of give you this sense of control, like of speeding up, slowing down, and kind of doing what you want to do versus what you're being told to do. Whereas when in a treadmill, you can obviously adjust the pace, which I did a lot of, but ultimately you're responding to the belt or doing what the belt's telling you to do. So that was the hardest part, I think, was knowing, like, when I set it to a specific pace, I was being told what to do by the treadmill, and that kind of made this psychological battle of wanting to get off of it. And so that was the hardest part to get over. I took way more breaks than I had planned on taking, and way more breaks than I normally do in a 100-miler that's on a flat surface. So I don't know how much of that I could I'm guessing I could improve on that quite a bit just from doing it more times. Probably not going to, but what I've been trying to tell myself too is, like, the interesting thing for me with this too is it was in close enough proximity to last August when I broke the 100-mile and 12-hour world records at the Pettit Center. So that was a process that took me almost 6 years to get to that specific race, where I had the tools and I had the training and everything in between that led to that day, versus the treadmill was different enough, I think, from what I've done in the past, that there was a lot of learning to do on that day that I had figured out a lot of on some of these other surfaces. So that's one thing I like to tell my coaching clients too, especially when they're first-time 100-milers, is don't go in expecting things to happen the way we planned them out exactly. Expect things to happen that we don't expect, but let's get really good at responding to those things. Let's get really good at, like, getting past them and not dwelling on them and being forward thinking versus thinking in hindsight when there's nothing you can do about it at this point. So I definitely had a few opportunities to practice what I preached to some of my clients on the treadmill on that day.
You had so many people there helping you, even virtually. You had your wife there helping you. And I think of me during my 100-mile races, and like there becomes a part of the race where you're going to reach your goal, or you're going to finish, and you've got the feeling of everybody around you, and like emotion can just overtake you. Did you have moments like that during your treadmill world record?
Yeah, I felt like I was in decent enough control most of the day, where my mindset was kind of like, all right, if I just keep doing the things I need to do, I'll get the record. And it was just a question of, like, what are my time, the possibilities for the time. So like that, I think that helped kind of keep me motivated, that I was never like hemorrhaging time to the degree where I felt like there was a chance that I was going to, like, just crash and burn on it. But I definitely felt a bit of a relief, I think, when I hit somewhere around 75 miles and was starting to get into the ballpark of what my long runs were from a time and distance standpoint, and just kind of know that I was now kind of getting to the back end of it versus, all the time that was like spent kind of thinking about what's it going to be like to be on a treadmill all day, kind of a mindset. Yeah. And then, I mean, just knowing that, like you said, like, my wife spent the entire day plus multiple other days helping us get it set up and ready for it, adjusting her schedule and, making sacrifices with what she was trying to do in order to kind of help out and get me what I needed, is just like a little more incentive, I think, to keep pushing hard throughout the course of the day, because when you're being honest with yourself, it's not just you, it's you and everyone who's donated their time and energy and put everything into place and helped you get it there. So there's a little bit of that motivation of, like, not wanting to let other people down that have, given time and energy for a whole thing.
It's really cool that like I might like go, okay, I think that I'm going to set my goal as doing a 50K or doing this 50 mile. Like you're setting your goal as, I think I'm going to break a world record. And like, that's just really awesome. And you're inspiring young kids that are hopefully listening to us today. Do you have any other records that are in your mind of that you would like to go for?
Yeah, I think what I told myself when I've spent a good chunk, a little over half of my ultra running career, kind of targeting that 100-mile world record. What I told myself is like, if I find myself in a position where I feel like I've gotten every last second out of what I can do, forget the world record and the time and all that stuff, just at the individual level, that will be when I don't really chase those anymore. So I still think I can maybe shave some time off of that. So that is something, whether it's my own world record or someone else's, by the time I get to it, is anyone's guess, I suppose. But I do think I can run a little faster than at least I did at the Pettit Center. So that is one objective I'd like to kind of focus on with the rest of my career. Also, just like I'm really interested in the 24-hour distance. I've been maybe a little hesitant. I've been very hesitant actually to make it a primary focus. I've done some 24-hour events that haven't gone great. A lot of times they're at my own fault because I'm kind of trying to more or less piggyback off of a different focus. So I'll do like 100-miler and then just try to put a 24-hour, maybe like a couple months later, and hope for the best, which I've learned is not the move. That event needs its own focus and its own like build up, and it's unique enough that it can't take like a secondary role if you really want to have a good day, in my opinion. So that is something though that I think I can be very good at. So I'm also mindful that 24 hours, you don't have to be quite as young to do an event like that very well. I actually think Giannis Kouros was 40 when he broke the world record, which I think is one of the most stout world records in the sport right now. So I don't know if I would be able to get to where his standard is, but it'd be fun to try. And it would certainly be fun to see like how far I could go in 24 hours. So that's definitely something I'm going to be putting a lot more time and energy into as I kind of continue in the sport and once events start popping up in a more traditional fashion.
Yeah, I find the timed events extremely interesting because the time doesn't stop clicking.
Yeah.
It's just you have to manage it so well, and I find those very interesting.
It is funny because like when you're doing like just 100-miler point to point or any race point to point, you have this little bit of incentive in your mind, like, well, if I push a little harder, I'll get done sooner. And you can kind of talk yourself into maybe running a little faster than you want to, especially at the end. Whereas when you're doing a timed event, it doesn't matter how fast you run, you're still out there for 12 hours, 24 hours, 48 hours, whatever it is. More work by trying harder, which is kind of this weird, like mixed message in your mind. Because usually trying harder means better.
Yeah, it means being done.
Yeah.
Is there a race that you've done or a record that you have set that is special to you, that stands out as a favorite?
Yeah, I mean, definitely the 12-hour and 100-mile at the Pettit Center last August is the one. And mostly because of the amount of time I spent to kind of get to that point. And kind of like I mentioned, it was almost 6 years from when I did my first one in 2013 at Desert Solstice. So knowing that I kind of stuck to that plan and made adjustments, learned from my mistakes, and ultimately got to where I wanted to get with that is it was just a kind of a huge reward. And I think a great message for my own reminding, as well as anyone who wanted to pay attention, was that if don't give up if you fail a few times along the way. Like, take those as lessons, build off them. Even if you have a bad race, there's definitely some positives in there you can glean from, whether it's from the training build up to it, during the race itself. And there's other mistakes that you can learn from too. So if you run a perfect race, there's not as much learning to be done, other than that you assume you probably did it the right way. When you make a few mistakes, then you kind of can go back to the drawing board and fine tune some things and really feel like you learned something from that experience. So I think that's why that one sticks out, just the amount of time and kind of energy that I spent over the years kind of with that as one of my primary focuses.
Do you feel like you ran a perfect race there or ever?
I think I ran about as perfect as I could on that day. I think it was, I don't know that I could have run any faster on that day. You know, mine is having the lane one to myself, I guess, is probably the biggest variable that I wasn't able to, maybe the only variable actually that I wasn't able to control. I mean, the Pettit Center is about as perfect as it gets. They keep it at like 60 degrees. They had 2 porta potties right off the track, so that you didn't really have to waste a lot of time. I stopped a total of 3 times for maybe 4 minutes total. The biggest part was just I was probably average lane two or just inside of lane two, because you get like 30, 40 people out on the track and they spread out over the course of the day. If you're doing a shorter distance than everyone else, you're going to likely be running faster, and the passing person is the one that moves to the outside. So spread enough people out, then you're just basically going to sit out there because you're passing someone at all times, basically. So that I could probably get a few minutes off of that. If I'm able to do an event that's maybe a little more 100-mile specific, or that's set up that way, as well as just, having one more experience under my belt, and, maybe be a little more bold now that I know that I can do 11:19. So, yeah, that's kind of where I'm sitting with that at the moment.
I'm curious, where does your mind go? How do you keep going for that long? What are you focusing on?
Yeah, that's a good question. When I do it right, I'm always focusing on like a small benchmark. So like the biggest mistake I think you can make is go in there thinking like all day long, I'm running 100 miles today, and just start kind of counting down. I think that gets to be a little too like mentally and emotionally taxing. So for me, I like to kind of like, I go to the event with kind of a range of lap splits that I'm trying to target. And once I kind of dial in that intensity, I try not to look at the splits every lap, but I'll spot check it and make sure I'm in range. So that's kind of the first objective, is like, okay, make sure you're staying within this range as often as possible. If you're bleeding inside, or if you're bleeding outside of it, either too fast or too slow, kind of check yourself. And then you kind of have these distance markers along the way that make a lot of sense. 30 miles has always made a lot of sense for me, because it seems like that one the first 30 miles kind of fly right on by, and then it starts to get a little more tedious. 50 miles makes a lot of sense to me, just as it's kind of the halfway mark. 100K, just because it's kind of a standard distance. And you kind of just chip away at these little benchmarks along the way. And for me, I really like to get to that point when I'm within range of my longest long run during the buildup. Because one of the things I'll do during my long runs in those kind of final couple months leading in is I'll use those as like simulations. So if it's like a 30-mile long run, I'll pretend I'm starting at mile 70 and just visualize what it's like to do that final 30 miles. So then when you get to that point in the race, you feel like you've done it like 6, 7, or 8 times in the last couple months, versus, whenever you did your last 100-miler or your last event like that. So those are kind of things I like to bring with me in. And then there's small little things you use along the way. The way I like to describe it is, when you're doing a short loop track race like that, is like you're never hiding, you're always kind of exposed. So things tend to spiral in a negative way quickly, but they can also spiral in a positive way quickly. So when you start catching yourself, doubting yourself, or thinking negatively, if you can catch that right away and try to spin it back to a positive direction, then you're kind of doing the right thing. So you just get kind of used to kind of knowing and predicting when and what is going to creep into your mind from a negative standpoint. And then when it happens, you recognize it a lot quicker, and kind of course correct before it becomes too big of a problem to kind of resolve.
That's great. For your world record, are you still in recovery mode, or how did you recover?
Yeah, I think I took a little more recovery than I normally do. I think just partly because of the circumstances, with no real kind of next race goal on the timeline. I also had a pretty heavy race season in 2019. So if there was ever a year that I would want to have a layoff from racing, it would probably be this one. So I've been just a little more cautious with like the recovery and how quickly I'm building up. With that said, like I've kind of started the beginnings of what I would normally do for like a typical 100-mile buildup in the early stages. So a little less volume, but a little more intensity at those kind of short interval type sessions being one of the primary focuses. And just with the anticipation that we'll likely see some races pop up by early next year or late this year with any luck. So I'm kind of putting myself on that like maybe 5 to 6 month timeline as to like ideal for training purposes. And then the biggest difference obviously is I don't actually have a target race on the schedule. So as we get further into the year, I'll want to try to like at least identify what terrain I want to race on, so I can start specifying to that, because if it ends up being something that's got, you know, more climbing and descending, then I'll need to be getting those mechanics addressed in my training. So that's where I'm at right now. I'm kind of putting the final touches on some of those short interval, or what you can maybe call like a VO2 max system training, and just kind of going through those paces at the moment.
What do you have any idea of what the next sort of challenge you would like to do, or is it just going to depend on what happens in the world?
Yeah, I mean, it'll definitely depend a bit on what happens, but yeah, part of me is leaning probably to more of a trail-based race, just because now I've been doing mostly flat races for about a year, and since my wife and I moved to Arizona, I've tried to do a decent job of splitting the year up into halves, where I'm doing more trail stuff half the year and more flat road track type stuff in the other half of the year, just to kind of get that mental reset. You know, one of the other things I've learned over the course of my ultra running career is that you don't necessarily always need a physical reset, or you do need a physical reset, but you know, that's just one piece to the puzzle. The other is just being mentally ready to train for whatever it is you're going to race. And what I found is if I do a lot of flatter stuff, after a while you get a little stale and kind of like just doing the same things over and over again, that like it just gets a little more exciting, a little more motivating to kind of switch directions a bit. So I'm getting kind of to that point where I probably need to do something with a little more climbing and descending in order to be fresh for whatever flat, faster thing I do next after that. So that's kind of where I'm leaning right now, but I'll let the next like month or so kind of determine if I end up going that route or not.
Yeah, it's hard to say what's going to happen.
Yeah.
We would have never thought that we would still be where we're at right now, as far as races and stuff go.
Yeah, it is wild. I mean, it feels like years ago that, you know, 2020 even started. So it's like we're in this weird kind of time warp where nothing makes sense. The sooner we can get back to some normalcy, I think the better.
Yeah, my first race that was, well, I remember thinking it was like around March, and I remember thinking, oh, there's no way that it'll be all better by Kettle, which is the second weekend of June.
Yeah.
And now I've got people going, do you think Frozen Gnome's going to happen, which is in January of 2021? I'm like, just never thought that would happen.
Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy. Have you guys been doing virtual races to replace, or what have you been doing?
Yeah, we've had some really good virtual races, and it's been great for people to feel together. So we had we had the Midwest States 100 and 100K, which is actually a new race that we're putting on next year, which is near Stevens Point. So it's
cool.
I'm wondering if you ran there. It's a Chequamegon National Forest over by Medford.
Yeah.
And so it's about an hour from Stevens Point.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're putting on the Midwest States 100 there next year. And we are doing a virtual race where we're doing filming behind the scenes. So anybody that signed up for the race can see us planning the race. And we're filming the course and talking about how we pick the course out and things like that. So it's been really exciting. We had quite a few people on that. And right now we have one called Coyote Summer going on, which it's keeping people training and keeping people consistent running when there's not races in the future throughout all of July and August. So it's been fun. I mean, runners have adapted, and you know, we're finding stuff that is good to do. Have you done any virtual stuff that get signed up for any of those?
Yeah. I did a virtual half marathon, and that's it so far. So I haven't jumped in wholesale, I guess, with the virtual stuff. Like, it's funny. Some people are just like getting all into it. which I think is really cool. I think it's gonna be neat to see like what we gain in addition to like what we have been doing historically when we get through this. I mean, I think like virtual events or just even just virtual like uh kind of like playgrounds, for lack of better words, for adults is going to be interesting. And, one thing I'm working on with my one of my sponsors, S Fuels, is this thing called their VPR, where they're going to do a lot of different kind of virtual treadmill and cycling based competition type stuff, similar to like a Zwift type of thing. And I think they're actually going to integrate Zwift within the program. But I think that's gonna be kind of cool to see. Like, what, even if you're stuck at home on a treadmill or on a bike or something like that, you can still kind of have a lot of fun or gamify it more or less. So we're learning stuff even through the hard parts.
I agree. There's been some cool stuff to it, but then there's also been some great stuff that's happened because of it. That's going to make the world, like, it's brought us closer together and, in some odd sort of way.
Sure.
So let's see. Well, we always finish up with the Ordinary Mule Stubborn 5. So it's 5 questions that you're supposed to answer as stubbornly or as quickly as you can. Because we're
All right.
Ordinary Mule, we're stubborn, we're tough, and we're trail runners. So here's the questions. So question number 1, what is the longest race you've ever completed?
Longest race, 200 kilometers or 125 miles.
Oh, where was that?
It was actually a last chance 24-hour event in what was it? South Carolina, I think. It was like, it's not an actual event. They put it up as like a last chance to qualify for the World Championships team. And I went there with that in mind, and I actually ended up getting a little bit of kind of pain in one of my legs so I stopped at 200K, because technically I think it was like a 200 kilometer like track American record or something like that. So I got to there, but then I stopped because I was gonna be doing Mad City 100K 4 weeks later, and I didn't want to like compromise my chance to get on the 100K championship team. But that's my mileage PR to date, so I got that out of it, if nothing else.
Oh, cool. And then you went and saw Timo at Mad City.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So then your first pair of running shoes were?
Oh, that's a good question. It was, I couldn't tell you the model. It was like some like cheap version of a Nike like trail running shoe, actually, I think. My uncle gave them to me, actually.
Well, the first pair were a trail shoe. That's really cool. So what's an upcoming challenge you are looking forward to?
I've got a really big one kind of in the works right now that I'm likely going to be doing next year, with any luck. That is a Transcon, where you run from San Francisco to New York. So I'm aiming for either spring or fall for that one next year.
Will you be going through Chicago or Wisconsin area?
Yeah, I actually think the standard route kind of like swings up and hits at least the southern part of Chicago or just underneath Chicago. So I'll be pretty close.
Well, we'll help you if there's anything we can do to help.
Good deal. I'll take all the help I can get.
Okay. So who was the biggest influence in your life?
Biggest influence, that's a good question. I would say, given where I ended up with investing so much of my own time and energy into running and coaching and things like that, would be my college and high school cross country and track coaches. They were probably the ones that set me up to even envision doing these sorts of things.
Oh, that's fantastic. I love that. And what's your favorite treat for a job well done?
Favorite treat, did you say?
Treat, yes.
A ribeye steak.
Ooh.
Fattier the better.
Well, that's good. Well, thank you so much. What website can people go to learn about your coaching?
If you head over to zachbitter.com, that's got kind of links and info to all that stuff.
And then is there any place else that you'd like people, like your Instagram handle? Do you use Twitter?
Sure. Yeah. Instagram is just @ZachBitter and Twitter is @ZBitter.
Okay. Well, good. Well, thank you, Zach, so much for taking time to talk to us and come on. We would welcome you and your wife out here in the Midwest. We would take good care of you. And we wish you lots of luck on the rest of your year. And thank you for Ryan Haywood, because he's our producer and helped organize all this. And my son Royal, who's sitting here next to me, who helps me with all my lights and stuff like that. But we look forward to seeing you hopefully on some Midwest trails again soon. And thank you, Krystal, as always.
Oh, yes, I know. I did a good job sitting here listening the whole time.
You did a great job. We have a really big star on, so we're both kind of probably a little bit nervous here.
Well, no, I was just listening. I mean, I think that I actually tuned in a little bit when Zach, when you did the treadmill world record. I couldn't watch the whole time because between me teaching my students online and then trying to help my daughter with her e-learning, I would pop in every now and then, and it was a really cool setup that you had. We had a lot of fun watching.
Well, thanks. That was kind of a fun, different thing to do. And well, thanks a bunch for having me on the show too. It looks, you guys do a good job, and the lighting looks perfect. So congrats, Royal.
We're working on it.
The lighting's better than mine.
I see the light.
So I painted that owl right there during COVID.
Oh,
that
did
was
you?
Like my stress relief.
Nice.
It's the Kettle 100 logo for this year. It's actually on my shirt.
Oh, look at that.
It's my favorite shirt. So I wanted to design the wall to look like that. And then I also painted that ornery mule right there.
Very cool.
So,
perfect podcast studio.
Yeah. Yeah, we can't wait till we can have people in here. This is we're at the Ornery Mule Racing Trailhead in Crystal Lake, and it's a building that's right on a trail. And we expected to have it full of runners, and we'd be running trails and going to the lake across the street. But nope, we're just here by ourselves right now. So, well, thank you, Zach.
Yes, thank you.
Take care, and goodbye, you guys. Thank you.
Yeah,
Bye.
have a good
Thank
night.
you, Zach.
Bye-bye.